Red and blue lights flickered against Maya Reynolds' terrified face as she stood outside her silver SUV, arms raised, surrounded by 3 white officers. Her trunk was open, personal items scattered across the pavement. Officer Trent Morrison, tall and sneering, hovered close. "What else you hiding, sweetheart?" His voice dripped with mercury. Maya's heart pounded. She'd done nothing wrong, yet here she was, treated like a criminal for simply driving home. Swallowing her fear, she asked, "Can I call my husband now?" Morrison laughed. "Not unless you want to spend the night in jail." But Maya didn't back down. She dialed a number. The camera zoomed in on her screen. Jordan Reynolds, Captain, HPD. Minutes later, tires screeched as a black SUV pulled up. Jordan stepped out, badge gleaming, face like stone. "Drop everything," he commanded. "Step away from my wife, now." Everything froze. But how did it come to this? Let's rewind 12 hours. Before we dive into the story, let me know where you're watching from. And if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. The morning sun cast long shadows across Houston's skyline as Maya Reynolds stood in front of the community center she managed, watching volunteers load boxes of supplies into the back of a delivery van. It was the tail end of a charity gala, a fundraiser for underprivileged youth programs she'd spent months organizing. The event had been everything Maya hoped for: packed attendance, generous donations, and hopeful smiles from the kids her organization served. It felt like progress, like change. Her phone buzzed, a text from her husband, Jordan Reynolds. "Sorry I missed the gala, love. Work's crazy. Home by 8. Dinner's on me." Maya smiled, shaking her head. Jordan, newly promoted to police captain, had been swamped ever since the announcement. Still, he always found time for her, even if it meant late dinners and stolen moments between shifts. By the time the last box was loaded and the center locked up, dusk had settled over the city. Maya waved goodbye to the volunteers and climbed into her silver SUV. The route home was familiar: 30 minutes through quiet suburban streets, past rows of manicured lawns and cozy homes, the kind of neighborhood where people walked dogs, and kids rode bikes without worry. Her Bluetooth crackled to life as she merged onto the freeway. Jordan's voice filled the cabin. "How'd it go?" he asked, sounding tired but warm. "Better than expected," Maya replied. "We raised enough to fund the literacy program through the end of next year. The kids were so excited. Wish you could have seen it." "I wish I could have too," Jordan sighed. "But I'm proud of you, always." They chatted about small things, weekend plans, a friend's upcoming baby shower, until Jordan's dispatcher called him back to duty. "Love you. Drive safe," he said before hanging up. Maya glanced at the clock. 9:17 p.m. A quiet evening at home with leftovers, and a movie still sounded perfect. She exited the freeway onto a quieter road, where streetlights flickered between patches of darkness. It was a stretch she'd driven countless times without a second thought, but tonight something felt off. In her rearview mirror, Maya spotted a patrol car trailing her. No sirens, no lights, just following. She frowned, checking her speed. 32 miles per hour in a 35 zone. No rolling stops, phone untouched, everything by the book. "Probably just heading the same way," she muttered, forcing herself to relax. But the cruiser stayed close. Block after block, turn after turn. When Maya signaled and switched lanes, so did they. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Finally, at a red light, the inevitable happened. Flashing lights erupted behind her, painting the interior of her SUV in harsh red and blue. Her stomach dropped. Why? The question echoed in her mind as she pulled to the curb, heart pounding. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't broken any laws. This was her neighborhood, her safe space. As the officer approached, hand already resting on his holstered gun, Maya forced herself to breathe. "Routine, stop," she whispered. Nothing to worry about. But deep down, she knew better. This didn't feel routine. Not at all. And it was only the beginning. The flashing lights behind Maya Reynolds felt surreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. She pulled over, fingers trembling slightly as she shifted the SUV into park. The soft hum of the engine did little to drown out the pounding of her heart. In the rearview mirror, she saw the officer step out of the patrol car, a tall white man with a rigid posture and an unmistakable air of authority. His hand rested on the grip of his holstered gun as he approached, eyes cold and unreadable. Rolling down her window, Maya forced a polite smile. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer, his badge reading Morrison, ignored her greeting. "License and registration." Maya blinked. "Of course," she replied, reaching into the glove compartment. Years of the talk from her parents echoed in her mind. "Move slowly, keep your hands visible, stay calm." She did everything by the book, handing over her documents without protest. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" she ventured, her voice steady, despite the unease creeping into her chest. Morrison glanced at her license, then back at her. His lips curled into a smirk. "Suspicious activity reported in the area. Your vehicle matches the description." Maya's breath caught. Suspicious activity? In a silver SUV, wearing an evening gown, driving home from a charity event? The absurdity of the claim hit her like a slap, but she swallowed her frustration. "I just left the Willow Creek Community Center. There must be some mistake." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Excuse me. I've done nothing wrong. Are you detaining me?" The officer leaned in, his face inches from hers. "I said step out of the car now." Before Maya could respond, another cruiser pulled up behind the first. Two more officers emerged, one older with graying hair and a hardened expression, the other younger, almost jittery. Their flashlights cut through the night, beams dancing across her windshield. Real fear set in. 3 officers for 1 woman, on a quiet suburban street. This was no routine stop, this was intimidation. "Okay," Maya murmured, unbuckling her seatbelt with deliberate slowness. "I'm complying, but I'd like to know why I'm being treated this way." Her calmness seemed to irritate Morrison further. One officer moved to the passenger side, shining his flashlight into the back seat. The other hovered near the trunk, hand resting on his belt. As Maya stepped out, hands visible, Morrison circled her like a predator. "For any weapons, drugs, or illegal items in the vehicle?" Her brows furrowed. "Of course not. I'm coming from a fundraiser. There's nothing in my car except—" "Stay where I can see you," Morrison interrupted, signaling to his partner. Without another word, the younger officer popped open her trunk and began rifling through the neatly packed boxes from the gala. Brochures, tablecloths, and leftover decorations were tossed aside like garbage. "Hey," Maya snapped, the injustice finally boiling over. "You can't search my car without consent or probable cause." The older officer, Reed, chuckled. "Probable cause? Your attitude's enough for me." Maya's heart pounded in her ears. This wasn't just harassment. It was humiliation. She glanced at her phone, still resting in the cup holder. If she could just call Jordan. "Hands where I can see them," Morrison barked, noticing her gaze. His hand moved toward his taser. Maya froze, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. This was escalating too fast. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and she'd become another headline. Another black life reduced to a statistic. "I'm not resisting," she said carefully, voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I'd just like to call my husband." Morrison sneered. "You can do that after we're done here." The younger officer emerged from the trunk, holding a stack of brochures like they were contraband. "What's all this?" Maya's patience cracked. "Literacy program flyers, for children, from the charity event I just left." "Are you serious?" "Right now?" The laughter that followed was sharp, almost cruel. "Funny," Reed muttered. "You people always got some charity angle, don't you? You people." The words hit like a punch. Maya bit her tongue until she tasted blood, forcing herself not to react. Reacting meant escalation. Escalation meant danger. Morrison nodded toward the SUV. "Run her plates and license, let's see what else she's hiding." One of the officers stepped away, radioing dispatch while the others stood guard. Maya stood still, arms crossed tightly over her chest, every muscle screaming to flee. But she knew better. Running wasn't an option. Not for someone like her. The SUV's interior was now bathed in harsh light, the spotlight from the second cruiser illuminating every corner like a crime scene. Maya could barely contain her rage. This wasn't about safety. It was about power. Control. Racism, naked and unashamed, wrapped in the thin veil of procedure. Her phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. Jordan. Thank God. May I retrieve my phone to call my husband now? She asked, voice clipped but controlled. Morrison exchanged glances with Reed, who shrugged. No sudden moves, Morrison warned, like she was a threat. Carefully, Maya leaned into the car and grabbed the phone. The officers' hands tensed near their weapons, as if expecting an ambush. The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. She pressed Jordan's contact, heart hammering as the line rang. He picked up immediately. Maya, you okay? I've been calling. She didn't wait for pleasantries. Jordan, I'm pulled over. They're searching my car without cause. I need you here now. Silence. Then Jordan's voice, sharp and commanding. Where are you? Maya rattled off the street name, voice cracking. Please hurry. As she ended the call, she noticed the officers watching her more closely, their postures stiffening. They didn't know who she called, but something about her confidence unsettled them. Minutes crawled by like hours. Maya stood her ground, arms crossed, chin high, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. Cars passed slowly, drivers rubbernecking but not stopping. No one ever stopped. And then in the distance she heard it, the low growl of an engine, growing louder by the second. A black SUV rolled up, sleek and deliberate. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Jordan Reynolds, tall, broad-shouldered and radiating authority in his captain's uniform. His badge caught the streetlight, gleaming like a silent challenge. The officers froze. Morrison's cocky smirk faltered. Reed stiffened, hand instinctively dropping from his belt. Jordan's eyes swept the scene, landing on Maya first. Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by cold fury as he turned to the officers. Somebody, Jordan said, voice low and dangerous. Better explain why my wife is standing here like a suspect while you ransack her car. Silence. Maya's breath caught. This was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning. Comment number 1 if you think Maya had every right to defend herself against this treatment. Like and subscribe if you believe no one should have to fear for their life during a simple traffic stop. And what do you think Jordan's next move will be? Will his badge be enough to protect Maya, or is the danger far from over? Stay tuned. The air around them thickened as Jordan Reynolds stepped forward, badge glinting under the streetlights. His face was carved into a mask of cold fury, every muscle in his body taut. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority radiated from him like heat off asphalt. I asked. Jordan repeated, each word sharp enough to cut. Why my wife is standing on the side of the road like a suspect while you tear through her belongings. Officer Trent Morrison blinked, momentarily thrown off by the sudden shift in power. He squared his shoulders, trying to reclaim dominance. Sir, he said, the word forced and bitter. We received a report of suspicious activity involving a vehicle matching this description. Jordan's gaze flickered to the open trunk, where Maya's neatly packed fundraiser materials were now strewn about like garbage. Brochures lay crumpled next to tablecloths, and a box of children's books had been kicked over, their colorful covers now dulled by dirt. Suspicious activity, Jordan echoed, voice flat. In a silver SUV, driven by a well-dressed woman coming from a charity event. Morrison didn't flinch. Matching the description of a vehicle involved in potential drug trafficking, Maya, standing just behind Jordan, stiffened. Drug trafficking? Are you serious? I was handing out pamphlets for a literacy program an hour ago. Ma'am, Morrison cut in, voice dripping with faux patience. I need you to remain silent while we conduct our investigation. Jordan took a deliberate step forward, placing himself squarely between Morrison and Maya. You've already conducted an unlawful search. Do you have probable cause? Did she consent to this? Silence. Jordan's jaw tightened. That's what I thought. Call your supervisor, now. The younger officer, Reed, hesitated. He looked to Morrison, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. No need for that, Morrison muttered. We're almost done here. Jordan's eyes narrowed. You're done when I say you're done. Call your supervisor. The tension was suffocating. Even the street seemed to hold its breath. Morrison's face reddened, but he reached for his radio, voice tight, as he requested Lieutenant Parker's presence. As they waited, the humiliation continued. One officer, clearly trying to look busy, rummaged through Maya's purse, holding up her wallet like it might explode. Another flipped through the fundraiser flyers, muttering, "Never seen drug dealers use brochures before." Maya clenched her fists. It wasn't just an inspection. It was a performance. A display of power designed to strip her of dignity inch by inch. Reed, the youngest of the officers, shifted nervously. "Sir," he muttered to Morrison, "maybe we should just wrap this up. It's getting out of hand." Morrison shot him a withering glare. "Stand down, Reed." But Jordan didn't miss the crack in their unity. He stepped toward Reed, voice calm but heavy with authority. "Son, think carefully about your next move. You want to tie your career to this nonsense, because I will make sure Internal Affairs reviews every stop you've ever made." Reed swallowed hard, eyes darting between Jordan and Morrison. He took a step back, lowering his flashlight. Just then, another patrol car pulled up. Lieutenant Greg Parker, Morrison's direct superior, stepped out, irritation etched into every line of his face. He was an older white man, heavy-set but solid, the kind of cop who'd weathered decades of controversy without ever facing real consequences. "What the hell is going on here?" Parker barked, eyeing Jordan with obvious disdain. "Captain, Reynolds, I didn't expect to see you out here." Jordan didn't budge. "I didn't expect to find my wife treated like a suspect for driving home after a charity event." Parker's gaze flickered to Maya, then to the mess around her car. He sighed heavily, like a man inconvenienced by paperwork. "We got a report." Officers followed protocol. Jordan's smile was humorless. "Protocol? Illegal searches and intimidation are protocol now?" Parker's lips thinned. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be, Captain. Your wife's free to go." Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, but Jordan didn't move. "No," he said quietly. "We're not brushing this under the rug. I want badge numbers, body cam footage, dash cam footage, everything." Parker's jaw clenched. "I'll see what I can do." "See that you do," Jordan snapped. "Because if I find out footage mysteriously disappears, I'll bypass Internal Affairs and go straight to the media. We both know how that'll play out." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Parker's face. He knew Jordan wasn't bluffing. Finally, Parker nodded. "Reynolds, take your wife home. We'll sort this out." Jordan didn't move. Immediately. He held Parker's gaze until the older man looked away. Only then did he turn to Maya, gently placing a hand on her lower back. "Let's go." Maya climbed into the SUV, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Jordan followed, his face carved from stone. As they pulled away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Morrison stood rigid, hands balled into fists at his sides. "Jordan," Maya whispered, voice tight with emotion, "they're going to come after us for this." Her husband's eyes, dark and resolute, didn't leave the road. "Let them try." The ride home was suffocatingly silent. Maya gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline, her knuckles pale. Jordan sat beside her, jaw clenched so tightly it looked carved from stone. The night's events replayed in her mind on an endless loop, flashing lights, mocking voices, her belongings scattered like trash. The humiliation sat heavy in her chest, a toxic weight she couldn't shake. "They weren't going to stop," Maya muttered, breaking the silence. "If you hadn't shown up." Jordan cut her off, his voice low and firm. "I know, but knowing didn't make it better. It didn't erase the sting of being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. It didn't erase Morrison's sneer or Parker's dismissive tone." As they pulled into the driveway of their modest suburban home, Maya exhaled shakily. The house, usually a sanctuary, felt fragile tonight, like a place that could no longer keep the world's ugliness at bay. "I'll file a formal complaint first thing tomorrow," Jordan said, stepping out of the car. They crossed every line. Maya followed, slamming the door harder than she meant to. "Do you really think that'll change anything? They'll circle the wagons, protect their own, like they always do." Jordan stopped short, turning to face her. In the dim porch light, the exhaustion in his eyes was unmistakable. "I can't let this go, Maya. If I stay quiet, they win." She wanted to argue, to tell him they'd already won by stripping her of her dignity, by making her feel small. But she knew Jordan was right. Silence was complicity, and complicity was how systems like this thrived. The next morning, Jordan kept his promise. He filed a complaint, citing racial profiling, unlawful search, and harassment. He submitted dashcam and bodycam footage requests, already anticipating the familiar excuse, technical malfunction. Maya, determined not to be sidelined, contacted the Houston Civil Rights Alliance, a non-profit known for holding law enforcement accountable. They promised support but warned, "Cases like this don't go down quietly. Expect pushback." Pushback came faster than expected. That evening, as Maya left the community center after another long day, she found a bright orange parking violation stuck to her windshield. No parking. Tow zone. Her SUV was legally parked in a designated spot. She glanced around. Across the street, a patrol car idled, Officer Morrison behind the wheel. He didn't bother hiding his smug grin. Maya's hands trembled with fury as she ripped the ticket from the glass. She stormed over, ignoring every instinct screaming at her to stay silent. "Seriously?" she snapped, holding up the ticket. "This is how you retaliate. Fake citations." Morrison rolled down the window, eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. "Just doing my job, ma'am. You people always think the rules don't apply. You people." There it was again, the thinly veiled racism wrapped in professional indifference. "I'm reporting this," Maya shot back, voice shaking. "Harassment. Retaliation. All of it." Morrison leaned out, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Report all you want. Complaints get lost. Cameras fail. And witnesses? Well, they tend to forget." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Maya stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about power. A flex meant to remind her of her place. That night, Jordan's fury was volcanic. He called Parker directly, bypassing the usual channels. "Your officer is stalking my wife," Jordan snapped, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "You need to get Morrison under control or I will." Parker's response was infuriatingly casual. "Captain Reynolds, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Our officers conduct routine patrols all the time." Routine. Jordan's voice sharpened to a knife's edge. "Fake tickets and intimidation are routine now." Parker sighed like a man indulging a tantrum. "I'll look into it. In the meantime, I'd advise your wife to keep a low profile." The line went dead. The next escalation came 2 days later. Maya was driving home from the grocery store when the same patrol car flashed its lights behind her. Heart pounding, she pulled over, gripping the wheel so tightly her fingers ached. Morrison swaggered up to the window, smug as ever. "Evening, ma'am. License and registration." Her voice wavered. "I wasn't speeding. I didn't run a light. What's the reason for this stop?" "Routine check," Morrison replied, eyes glinting. "Step out of the vehicle." "Not without cause," Maya shot back, remembering Jordan's advice. Morrison's smile widened. "I said step out now." Before she could respond, he reached for the door handle, yanking it open. Maya barely unbuckled her seatbelt before rough hands pulled her out, slamming her against the side of the SUV. "Stop resisting," Morrison barked, though Maya hadn't moved. Her groceries spilled onto the sidewalk, milk pooling on the concrete, oranges rolling into the gutter. Her phone tumbled out of her pocket, screen lighting up with Jordan's name. Maya's world narrowed to the cold handcuffs biting into her wrists, the weight of Morrison's knee pressing her against the car. "You think you're untouchable 'cause you married a badge," Morrison hissed in her ear. "Think again." By the time Jordan arrived, sirens wailing, tires screeching, Maya was already in the back of the patrol car, tear-streaked and trembling. Morrison stood nearby, arms crossed, smirking like a man who just won a prize. Jordan exploded from his SUV, fury radiating from every pore. "Get her out of that car, now!" Parker, arriving moments later, surveyed the scene with thinly veiled exasperation. "Captain Reynolds," he drawled, "your wife was obstructing an investigation." Jordan's voice was deadly calm. "What investigation? Grocery shopping while black?" Parker shrugged. "We had reason to believe." "No." Jordan cut him off. "You had a reason to intimidate her, and you're not even hiding it anymore." He stalked toward Morrison, fists clenched. It took everything in him not to cross that final line. "Uncuff her, or I swear to God the next call I make will be to the mayor." The cuffs came off, but the damage was done. Maya collapsed into Jordan's arms, sobbing with rage and humiliation. That night, after Jordan filed yet another complaint, this time with Internal Affairs, Maya sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her untouched dinner. "They're not going to stop," she whispered. "They'll keep pushing until one of us breaks." Jordan nodded slowly, resolve hardening in his eyes. "Then we push back harder. But how do you fight a system designed to protect itself? How do you win when the people sworn to protect you are the ones tearing you down?" Comment number 1: if you think Maya was completely justified in standing up for herself, even at the risk of escalation, like and subscribe. If you believe no one should fear being pulled over because of their skin color. And what do you think Jordan's next move will be? Can one man really take on an entire corrupt system? Stay tuned. The station was unusually quiet for a Thursday evening. Captain Jordan Reynolds sat at his desk, eyes flicking between reports and his phone, which buzzed periodically with notifications. Paperwork had piled up faster than usual thanks to his recent promotion. While the title of police captain carried weight, it didn't shield him from the mundane grind of administrative tasks. He glanced at the clock, 8:47 p.m. Maya should have been home by now. His phone lit up with her name. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he reached for it, expecting a casual, "on my way" call. Instead, the line was silent for a beat, too long, and when Maya's voice came through it was sharp with panic. "Jordan," and pulled over. "They're searching my car without cause. I need you here now." Jordan froze, his chair scraped against the floor as he shot to his feet, heart slamming against his ribcage. "Where are you?" he demanded, already grabbing his keys from the desk. Maya rattled off an address, her voice trembling. "Please hurry." "I'm on my way, don't hang up," Jordan ordered, but the line had already gone dead. Every instinct sharpened. Jordan moved fast, his years of training kicking in. He radioed dispatch while sprinting to the parking lot. "This is Captain Reynolds. I need an immediate status check on a traffic stop near Hollow Creek and 17th. Silver SUV. Female driver." "Now." Static crackled before a bored voice responded. "Negative on any flagged stop, Captain. Must be routine. No assistance needed." Jordan's grip tightened on the radio. "That's my wife. I didn't ask if it was routine. I asked for a status check." Silence. Then begrudgingly, "Unit 209 reports active stop. Officers Morrison and Reed on site." Jordan's blood ran cold. Morrison. He didn't wait for further confirmation. Tires screeched as his SUV tore out of the precinct lot, red and blue lights slicing through the dark. His mind raced through worst-case scenarios. He'd seen it too many times. Innocent people humiliated, brutalized, or worse, all because they were black in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jordan pressed harder on the gas. The route was familiar, but the streets blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. His phone buzzed again, another call from Maya, but when he answered it wasn't her voice. "Sir." A cold, unfamiliar tone greeted him. "Your wife's being detained for obstruction. Might want to calm her down before she gets herself into more trouble." Jordan's breath caught. "Who the hell is this?" "Morrison," the officer replied, smugness practically oozing through the speaker. "I'm just following protocol, Captain. Your wife seems to think she's above it." The line went dead. Jordan's vision narrowed, fury burning in his chest. He was no longer driving to defuse a situation. He was racing into battle. 2 minutes later, Jordan's SUV screeched to a halt behind the patrol cars. He barely threw it into park, before slamming the door and striding toward the scene. His uniform was crisp, badge gleaming under the streetlights, but it was the controlled fury in his eyes that made the younger officer, Reed, take a nervous step back. Maya stood rigid beside her SUV, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her trunk was still open, fundraiser material scattered across the pavement. Morrison stood in front of her, arms folded, a smug grin plastered across his face. It vanished the moment he saw Jordan. "Captain Reynolds," Morrison greeted, feigning surprise. "Didn't expect you here." Jordan ignored him, eyes locking on Maya. "You okay?" he asked, voice tight. "I am now," she muttered, brushing a stray curl from her face. "But they searched my car without consent, cuffed me, humiliated me, for nothing." Jordan's gaze snapped back to Morrison. "You better have damn good cause for this." Morrison didn't blink. "Suspicious vehicle. Matched the description from a bolo, standard procedure." Jordan stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. "Standard procedure doesn't include illegal searches, racial profiling, and unnecessary force. Where's the body cam footage?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. Morrison's smirk returned. "Cameras were malfunctioning, unfortunate timing." Jordan's hands curled into fists. "You expect me to believe that?" Morrison shrugged. "Believe what you want. We were doing our jobs." The tension was suffocating. Jordan's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Your job ends now. Uncuff her, return her belongings, and pray this doesn't go straight to internal affairs tonight." For the first time, Morrison hesitated. He glanced at Reed, who quickly looked away, unwilling to back his partner any further. Jordan took another step forward, closing the gap between them. "Do it, or I'll make one call and have the entire precinct down here in 5 minutes. The smugness drained from Morrison's face. With a muttered curse, he jerked his head toward Reed. "Uncuff her." Reed didn't need to be told twice. He stepped forward, unlocking the handcuffs with shaking hands. Maya rubbed her wrists, eyes burning with unshed tears. Jordan moved to her side, gently guiding her toward their SUV. "This isn't over," Jordan promised, voice like steel. "Not by a long shot." As they drove away, Maya stared silently out the window, the lights of Houston blurring past. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. They weren't afraid of being caught. They were confident they'd get away with it. Jordan's grip tightened on the wheel. "That's because they always do. Not this time. He would make sure of it." The tension was suffocating as Jordan Reynolds stepped out of his black SUV, every movement deliberate, every breath controlled. His badge gleamed under the harsh streetlight, but it wasn't the symbol of authority that froze Officer Morrison in place. It was the look in Jordan's eyes, cold, unforgiving, and unyielding. Maya stood beside her SUV, arms tightly crossed, face pale with fury and humiliation. Her trunk was still open, fundraiser material strewn across the pavement like discarded trash. The handcuffs had been removed, but the red marks on her wrists remained, a silent testament to how far the situation had escalated. "Somebody," Jordan said, voice low and razor sharp, "better explain why my wife is standing here like a suspect while you tear through her belongings." Morrison, who had built his career on unchecked arrogance, straightened his posture, trying to reclaim dominance. "Captain Reynolds," he drawled, forcing faux politeness into his tone. "Didn't expect to see you here. Just a routine stop." Suspicious vehicle matching a bolo. Jordan didn't blink. "Suspicious." He gestured toward Maya's SUV. A silver SUV driven by a well-dressed black woman leaving a charity event. "That's what passes for suspicious now." Morrison's lips curled into a sneer. "We don't discriminate, Captain. We follow leads." Jordan's eyes flickered to Maya, then to the younger officer, Reed, standing stiffly to the side. The kid looked uncomfortable, his flashlight trembling slightly as he avoided Jordan's gaze. "Did you search the car?" Jordan demanded. Morrison nodded, arms crossing defensively. "Standard procedure." "Did she consent to the search?" Jordan's voice dropped further, dangerous in its quietness. Silence. Reed shifted uncomfortably. Jordan took a step forward, closing the distance between him and Morrison, because unless you had probable cause or consent, that search was illegal. And if you think flashing lights and a badge shield you from accountability, you're dead wrong. Reed opened his mouth to speak, but Morrison shot him a warning, glare effectively silencing him. Jordan didn't miss the exchange. He turned his attention fully to Morrison. "Body cam footage," Jordan said. "Let's see it." Morrison hesitated, and in that moment Jordan knew. Convenient malfunction, Jordan guessed, his expression darkening. Of course. And the dash cam? Reed, visibly sweating now, muttered, "System glitch." Jordan let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and cold. Glitches, malfunctions. It's funny how often that happens when black citizens are involved. Maya, standing behind Jordan, finally found her voice. "They refused to let me call you. They shoved me against my own car, handcuffed me and tore through my things like I was hiding drugs." Jordan's hand flexed at his side, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. "Enough," he said, voice cutting through the night air like a whip. "Call your supervisor. Now." Morrison's smirk returned, but it was thinner now, brittle. "That's not necessary, Captain. We're wrapping up here." "No," Jordan snapped, stepping even closer. "We're not. Call your supervisor." For the first time, Morrison hesitated. His bravado cracked, and beneath it, there was something else. Uncertainty. Fear. He knew the game had shifted. This wasn't just some random citizen he could bully into silence. This was Jordan Reynolds, a captain with enough clout to make his life very difficult. Reluctantly, Morrison reached for his radio. "Unit 209 requesting LT on site, Hollow Creek and 17th. The wait was agonizing. Maya stood rigid, arms crossed, tightly over her chest, refusing to meet Morrison's smug gaze. Jordan didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. He simply stood between his wife and the officers, like a wall they'd never breach again. 10 minutes later, another patrol car rolled up, and out stepped Lieutenant Greg Parker. Stocky, middle-aged, with graying hair and the unmistakable air of a man who'd spent decades bending the system to his will. His eyes narrowed the moment he spotted Jordan. "Captain Reynolds," Parker greeted, voice laced with false warmth. "What seems to be the problem here?" Jordan's jaw tightened. "The problem, Lieutenant, is your officers illegally searching my wife's vehicle, detaining her without cause and refusing her the right to contact counsel. That sound like standard procedure to you?" Parker sighed, the weariness exaggerated. "Look, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. The officers were responding to a credible tip. No harm intended." "No harm," Maya snapped, stepping forward. "They humiliated me, treated me like a criminal. What would have happened if Jordan hadn't shown up? You'd be booking me right now?" Parker's eyes flickered with irritation. "Mrs. Reynolds, let's not escalate this further." Jordan's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Escalate? This was already escalated the moment your officers decided a black woman in an SUV was a threat. This isn't ending here, Parker. I want badge numbers, incident reports, and copies of the body cam footage by morning." Parker's forced smile faltered. "Now, Jordan, you know how these things get blown out of proportion. Let's keep this between us. No need to drag IA into it." Jordan's expression hardened. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Either you handle this the right way, or I take it to internal affairs and the mayor's office. Your call." The silence that followed was deafening. Parker glanced at Morrison, who stood rigid, face pale with fury. Finally the lieutenant sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "Fine, we'll log it and file the report, but don't expect fireworks, Captain. You know how the system works." Jordan's smile was grim. "Yeah, I know exactly how it works, and I'm about to break it." Without another word he turned to Maya, gently guiding her back toward their SUV. She didn't speak until they were inside, the door closed, and the flashing lights fading behind them. "They're not going to stop," Maya whispered, voice shaking with barely restrained rage. "They're going to make us pay for this." Jordan's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, knuckles white as they gripped the steering wheel. "Let them try." Comment number 1: if you believe Jordan was right to stand his ground and protect Maya from this injustice. Like and subscribe if you think officers like Morrison and Parker should be held accountable for abusing their power. And what do you think will happen next? Will Jordan's badge be enough to shield them, or is the danger far from over? Stay tuned. The next morning, Jordan Reynolds stood in the precinct's internal affairs office, arms crossed, jaw tight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the desk where Sergeant Carla Ruiz, one of the more honest officers in the department, sat typing furiously. "You're sure about this, Captain?" Ruiz asked, glancing up from her computer. "A formal complaint against Morrison and Reed? That's not just paperwork. It'll trigger a full investigation." Jordan's face was carved from stone. "I'm sure. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was targeted harassment." Ruiz sighed, rubbing her temples. "All right, filing it now, but you know what happens next, right?" Jordan nodded grimly. Retaliation was inevitable. The system didn't take kindly to its own being exposed. By noon, word had spread like wildfire. Officers whispered in corners, eyes darting toward Jordan whenever he passed. Morrison was conspicuously absent from roll call, but Jordan didn't. Fooled himself into thinking that meant accountability was swift. It never was. The first real sign of the cover-up came just hours later. Jordan sat at his desk, sifting through paperwork, when his computer pinged with an internal email from Records. Request for bodycam footage denied. Reason: system malfunction. His stomach sank. Immediately he called Ruiz. "Carla, tell me you're seeing this." Her voice was strained. "I am, and it gets worse. The dashcam footage, corrupted file, can't be recovered." Jordan closed his eyes, fury simmering beneath the surface. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Ruiz agreed. "It's a cover-up." Jordan hung up without another word. He grabbed his jacket and headed straight to Lieutenant Parker's office. The door was ajar, and Jordan didn't bother knocking. Parker looked up from a pile of reports, face carefully blank. "Something I can help you with, Captain?" Jordan threw the printed denial notice onto the desk. "Bodycam footage, dashcam footage. Both malfunctioned. You expect me to buy that?" Parker leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "Technology fails sometimes. You know how it is." "Don't insult my intelligence," Jordan snapped. "This isn't failure. It's a cover-up. Your officers broke the law and now you're burying the evidence." Parker's expression hardened. "Watch your tone, Reynolds. You're stepping out of line." Jordan leaned in, voice dangerously low. "Out of line? My wife was handcuffed and humiliated for driving home while black. Your officers violated protocol, and now you're protecting them." Parker's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Captain. You're making enemies you can't afford." Jordan straightened, his disgust barely concealed. "The only thing I can't afford is staying silent." He stormed out, heart pounding in his ears. This wasn't just about Morrison anymore. It was systemic, protected, and far more entrenched than Jordan had realized. That evening, Maya sat at the dining room table staring at her laptop. News articles about police misconduct filled her screen, each headline more infuriating than the last. Her phone buzzed. A text from the Houston Civil Rights Alliance. "Received your complaint. We're investigating, but without footage, it's an uphill battle. Stay safe." She tossed the phone aside, frustration boiling over. When Jordan walked in, his expression told her everything she needed to know. "They're covering for him," Maya muttered, voice flat. "Aren't they?" Jordan nodded, collapsing into the chair opposite her. "Bodycam footage is missing. Dashcam files corrupted. They think if there's no proof, there's no case." Maya closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "So what now? We just let them win?" "No," Jordan said firmly, "we go around them." The next morning, Jordan contacted Jessica Lee, an investigative journalist known for her fearless reporting on police corruption. They met at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. Jessica, a sharp-eyed Asian-American woman in her 30s, listened intently as Jordan and Maya recounted the entire ordeal, from the initial stop to the missing footage. "This isn't just about one bad stop," Jessica murmured, jotting notes. "This is systemic, targeted." Jordan nodded. "And it's bigger than Morrison. Parker's involved. Maybe higher." Jessica's eyes gleamed with determination. "If you're willing to go on record, I'll make sure this story gets out." Maya didn't hesitate. "Do it." 2 days later, the headline exploded across social media and local news stations. "Badge over justice, when power protects racism." The article detailed Maya's harassment, the missing footage, and the department's stonewalling. It included Jordan's official complaint, backed by character witnesses from the community center, and Maya's colleagues. The backlash was immediate. The department's phone lines were flooded. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read "Justice for Maya Reynolds" and "Who protects us from the police?" Lieutenant Parker, blindsided by the media storm, called Jordan into his office, barely hiding his rage. "You really went to the press?" Parker growled, slamming the newspaper onto his desk. Jordan didn't flinch. "The system covered for corruption. The public deserves to know." Parker's face reddened. "You've made enemies, Reynolds. Don't expect them to play fair." Jordan's voice was ice. They weren't playing fair to begin with. By the end of the week, under mounting public pressure, Morrison and Reed were placed on administrative leave. It felt like progress, a small victory in an uphill battle. But Jordan knew better than to celebrate. That night, as he and Maya sat on the couch, exhausted but hopeful, a bull rock shattered their front window. Glass sprayed across the floor. Jordan bolted to the door, heart racing, but the street was empty except for the faint red tail lights disappearing into the distance. On the porch lay a spray-painted cardboard sign. "Snitches get stitches." Maya's face drained of color. Jordan picked up the sign, fists trembling with rage. "They're not done," he muttered. "No," Maya whispered, voice shaking. "But neither are we." The shattered glass still littered the living room floor when Jordan Reynolds called the precinct to report the incident. The dispatcher's response was chillingly indifferent. "We'll send someone when available." No urgency, no concern. Just another box to check off. Maya sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the cardboard sign that now rested on the coffee table. "Snitches get stitches." The red spray painted dripped slightly, like blood still, fresh and seeping into cardboard fibers. "This is what they do," Maya muttered, voice flat. Intimidation, silence through fear. Jordan's jaw tightened. They picked the wrong family. The patrol car that finally arrived an hour later didn't bring comfort. Officer Reed stepped out, looking sheepish and uncomfortable. He glanced at the sign, then at Jordan before pulling out his notepad. "Captain Reynolds," Reed mumbled. "Dispatch said you had an incident." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "You're seriously asking like you don't know, after everything?" Reed flinched, but said nothing. He scribbled a few notes, snapped a half-hearted picture of the sign, and promised someone from the department would follow up. But Jordan already knew the truth. There would be no follow-up, no investigation, no justice. The real retaliation began the next day. It started small, barely noticeable if they hadn't already been on edge. Maya found a parking violation ticket on her SUV while parked legally outside the community center. She tossed it without much thought, assuming it was a mistake. But when another ticket appeared the following morning, this time for expired tags that weren't expired, Jordan's instincts kicked in. "They're targeting you," Jordan muttered, examining the ticket. "Trying to grind you down." Later that afternoon, Maya's phone buzzed with a notification from her home security app. The doorbell camera captured two uniformed officers standing at the front door. Neither knocked. They simply stood there, looking around, one jotting something on a notepad. After a minute they left. "Surveillance," Jordan muttered, jaw tightening. "They want you to feel watched." Maya's hands trembled as she replayed the footage. How long before they stop watching and start acting? 2 nights later, the answer came. Maya closed the community center around 9 p.m., exhausted after a long day. As she walked to her SUV in the nearly empty parking lot, she noticed something was off. Her headlights were dimmer than usual. Frowning, she approached and froze. All 4 tires had been slashed. "Damn it," she hissed, heart pounding. She fumbled for her phone, ready to call Jordan, when another notification from the security app popped up. Front door camera detected movement. Her stomach dropped. She tapped the alert, pulling up the live feed. 2 figures in dark clothing stood on her porch. One held a can of spray paint. The other flicked a lighter, the flame dancing ominously close to the welcome mat. Panic surged. Maya didn't think, she acted. Speed dialing Jordan, she backed away from her car, eyes darting across the empty lot. "Jordan," she gasped. "2 men, our house, spray paint and a lighter. I'm on my way." Jordan snapped, already moving. "Get somewhere safe, now." Maya sprinted back to the community center, locking the door behind her as she called 911. The dispatcher's bored voice nearly broke her. "Ma'am, officers are busy. We'll send someone when available." "They're trying to set my house on fire," Maya screamed. "Send someone now, click." The line went dead. By the time Jordan arrived home, tires screeching, the vandals were gone. The front door was covered in red graffiti. "Keep your mouth shut." The welcome mat smoldered, half burned but thankfully not ignited. Jordan's chest heaved as he scanned the street, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke. He checked the back door windows, everything was locked, but the sense of safety their home once provided was gone. Maya arrived minutes later, visibly shaking. "They're escalating," she whispered. "If they're willing to do this, what's next?" Jordan's phone buzzed. An anonymous text message. "Back off, Reynolds, before someone gets hurt." He showed it to Maya. Her face paled. "We need to go public. Fully public. They're not just threatening us, they're daring us to stay quiet." Jordan nodded slowly. "Then we make sure the whole city hears us." The next morning, Jordan stood at the precinct, staring down Lieutenant Parker. "2 officers off duty were seen on my porch last night. Graffiti, attempted arson, and this." He slammed his phone onto Parker's desk, showing the threatening text, "Your people are crossing the line." Parker leaned back, completely unfazed. "That's quite the accusation, Captain. Got proof those were my officers? Or are you just grasping at straws?" Jordan's fists clenched. "You're protecting criminals. You think your shield covers you forever." Parker's smile was thin and cruel. "Forever? No. Just long enough to make you regret pushing this." Jordan leaned in, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't scare me, Parker. And when this house of cards falls, I'll make sure you're the first one buried under it." That evening, Maya returned to the community center to find the front windows smashed. Spray painted across the door was one word: traitor. Tears pricked her eyes, not from fear but sheer exhaustion. Enough was enough. That night, she and Jordan sat side by side at the dining table, reviewing every piece of evidence they'd collected. The tickets, the surveillance footage, the text messages, the vandalism. Jordan compiled an official report for Internal Affairs, but Maya went further. She contacted Jessica Lee, the journalist who had first covered her story. "This ends now," Maya said, voice firm. "We're going public again, full exposure." The following morning, Maya and Jessica stood in front of the vandalized community center, cameras rolling. Maya spoke directly into the microphone, her voice steady despite the turmoil boiling. Inside her, "This isn't just about a traffic stop anymore," she said. "It's about abuse of power, about a system that protects its own, no matter the harm done to innocent people. They've tried to silence us, but we're not backing down." The footage aired that evening on every major local news station. The hashtag #JarJusticeForMaya trended within hours. Community leaders called for an independent investigation, and the city's mayor, unable to ignore the outcry, announced an emergency review of police misconduct cases. But the price of defiance was steep. That night, Jordan's phone rang again, an unknown number. "Captain Reynolds," a distorted voice rasped. "You keep pushing and next time we won't miss." The line went dead. Comment number 1 if you believe Jordan and Maya were right to fight back despite the danger. Like and subscribe if you think corrupt officers should face real consequences for abusing their power. And what do you think happens next? Will the public outcry protect them, or will the retaliation get worse? Stay tuned. The sun barely crept over the horizon when Jordan Reynolds stepped into the precinct, his face carved from stone. He carried a thick manila folder packed with every shred of evidence he and Maya had gathered, photographs of the vandalism, screenshots of the threatening texts, and timestamps from the community center's security cameras. This wasn't just a complaint, it was a case file, airtight and undeniable. Sergeant Carla Ruiz met him at the front desk, eyes flicking to the folder in his hand. "Captain Reynolds," she greeted, voice low and cautious. "You sure about this? Once you file this officially, there's no walking it back." Jordan's jaw tightened. There was no walking it back the moment they put their hands on my wife. Ruiz sighed but nodded. leading him to the Internal Affairs office. There, Jordan submitted the complaint directly to Lieutenant Harris, an older black officer known for walking the fine line between integrity and survival within the system. Harris flipped through the pages, expression grim. "This is serious, Reynolds," Harris muttered. "You're accusing not just Morrison and Reed, but implicating Parker and potentially others." Jordan leaned in, voice steady. "Because it's not just them. This is systemic. They've escalated from harassment to threats, vandalism, and attempted arson. How much further do they need to go before we act?" Harris met Jordan's gaze, then slowly nodded. "I'll escalate this, but you know what that means. Once this hits the chain of command, the backlash will be worse." Jordan straightened. "Let them come." Later that afternoon, Maya met with Jessica Lee at the newsroom. The journalist's face was taut with focus as she scrolled through the documents Maya provided. Screenshots of the threatening text, surveillance footage of the slashed tires, photos of the graffiti sprayed across the community center's front door. "This isn't just harassment," Jessica murmured. "Kids organized retaliation, and the fact that it's coming from within the department, that's a story the city won't be able to ignore." Maya nodded, resolve heartening. "Then tell it. Full exposure. Names, dates, everything." Jessica hesitated. "You understand what this means, right? Once we air this, you're not just targets for rogue cops. You're threats to the entire system, protecting them." Maya's smile was bitter. "We already are." That evening the segment aired on the local news under the headline, "From Traffic Stop to Target, a Family Under Siege by Police Retaliation." Jessica's voiceover narrated chilling footage. Maya's SUV with all 4 tires slashed. The spray-painted word "traitor" across the community center door. The anonymous threat text. The half-burned welcome mat on their porch. Every detail laid bare, accompanied by Jordan's official complaint filed with Internal Affairs. The public response was swift and furious. Social media erupted with hashtags, "Chart Justice for Maya," "Sharks Stop Police Terror," "Reynolds Strong." Protesters gathered outside the police headquarters, holding signs that read "Who polices the police" and "End retaliation now." Under mounting pressure, the department held a press conference the next morning. Chief Wallace, flanked by Parker and other high-ranking officers, addressed the cameras with a mask of concern. "We take these allegations seriously," Wallace intoned. "An independent investigation will be conducted, and any officer found to have violated protocol will face disciplinary action." Jordan watched from the back of the crowd, arms crossed, eyes locked on Parker. The lieutenant stood stiffly, face pale and drawn. He wasn't smiling now. After the conference, Jessica caught up with Jordan. "They're playing defense," she muttered, microphone still in hand. "Trying to control the narrative." Jordan nodded. "But they wouldn't be scrambling if they weren't scared." That afternoon, Morrison and Reed were officially placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It felt like progress, a rare, fleeting taste of victory. But Jordan's instincts screamed that it was too easy, too clean. His phone buzzed as he drove home. An unknown number. "Reynolds," he answered, voice wary. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "Think you've won, we're just getting started." The line went dead. Jordan slammed the steering wheel, cursing under his breath. He pulled into the driveway to find Maya standing on the porch, phone in hand, face pale. "They shut down the community center," she said, voice hollow. "City code violation, anonymous complaint, effective immediately." Jordan's breath caught. "Of course, they did. They're hitting us where it hurts," Maya whispered. "Not just our home, our work, our community." Jordan exhaled slowly, fury simmering beneath the surface. The leave, the investigation, it was all smoke and mirrors. The system was protecting itself, closing ranks while pretending to address the issue. But the Reynolds weren't backing down. Not now, not ever. The false sense of victory barely lasted 24 hours. By the next morning, Jordan Reynolds woke to the sharp ring of his phone. He groggily reached for it, expecting another media inquiry or departmental update. Instead, it was Sergeant Carla Ruiz, her voice tight with urgency. "Captain, you need to get down here. It's about the complaint you filed. It's complicated." Jordan sat up immediately, adrenaline surging. What happened? There's been a counter-complaint, Ruiz muttered. Filed anonymously, but it's detailed. It claims you tampered with evidence and falsified the harassment reports to discredit fellow officers. Jordan's heart sank. You've got to be kidding me. I wish I was, Ruiz sighed. Internal Affairs is already sniffing around. You need to get ahead of this. Jordan didn't wait for more. He was dressed and out the door within minutes, Maya trailing behind him, worry etched into every line of her face. At the precinct, the atmosphere was colder than usual. Officers who had once greeted Jordan with respect now averted their eyes, whispers trailing in his wake. The thin veneer of brotherhood had cracked, exposing the ugly undercurrent beneath. Ruiz met him in the hallway, file in hand. The complaint alleges you fabricated the threats against Meyer to push an anti-police agenda. They've even attached witness statements claiming you pressured them into backing your story. Jordan snatched the file, flipping through the pages. The signatures were real. Officers he'd worked alongside for years. Men who'd shared coffee and war stories, now throwing him under the bus to protect the system. This is Parker's doing, Jordan muttered, jaw tightening. He's building a narrative to discredit us. Ruiz nodded grimly. And it's working. The chief's office is reviewing your suspension, effective immediately, if they deem the complaint credible. Jordan's blood ran cold. Suspension meant removal of his badge, gun, and authority. It meant vulnerability. Not just for him, but for Meyer. By the time Jordan returned home, the retaliation had escalated further. Meyer stood in the driveway, arms crossed, face pale with fury. They shut off the community center's utilities, she snapped. Claimed there were safety concerns. We can't even get inside to grab supplies for the after-school program. Jordan's hands curled into fists. First the fake tickets, then the threats, now economic sabotage. The system wasn't just pushing back, it was crushing them under its weight. His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. Back off. Last warning. Jordan showed it to Meyer, who stared at the screen, face hardening. They're trying to scare us into silence. Well, it's not working, Jordan growled. We push harder. The next blow came swiftly and viciously. 2 days later, while Maya was restocking supplies for the center from a local warehouse, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Reynolds, a cool voice asked, "You might want to check on your house." The line went dead. Heart pounding, Maya pulled up the home security app. The front camera feed was blank. Camera offline. Oh my God, she breathed, throwing the car into drive and speeding home. When she arrived, her stomach twisted. The garage door was wide open, and the side entrance had been kicked in. Inside, the house was ransacked. Drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, picture frames shattered across the floor. Jordan arrived minutes later, sirens wailing behind him as Ruiz and another officer followed. Ruiz's face darkened as she surveyed the damage. "Any valuables missing?" she asked. Maya shook her head, tears prickling her eyes. No, this wasn't a robbery, it was a message. Jordan picked up a spray-painted sign left on the kitchen counter. "Drop it, or else." The red paint cell was still dripping. "This is beyond harassment," Ruiz muttered. "This is domestic terrorism." Jordan didn't hesitate. "File the report. Make it official. And I want surveillance on this house, effective immediately." Ruiz nodded, but the exhaustion in her eyes spoke volumes. They both knew surveillance wouldn't protect them, not when the threat was coming from within the department itself. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every passing car sent her heart racing. Jordan sat beside her on the couch, laptop open as he reviewed security footage from the community center. Suddenly, the screen flickered. A shadow moved across the cameras, few quick but unmistakable. "Someone's there," Jordan muttered, grabbing his phone and dialing Ruiz. "We've got movement at the center." Ruiz promised to send a patrol car, but by the time they arrived, the intruders were gone. The only evidence left behind was another spray-painted warning across the center's front door. "This ends when you end it." The next morning, Jordan's suspension was made official. Badge and gun surrendered. Access to departmental systems revoked. He was effectively cut off from the institution he'd served faithfully for over a decade. Maya watched silently as Jordan placed his badge on the dining table, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "They're winning," she whispered. "They're stripping us of everything piece by piece." Jordan looked up, determination flickering behind tired eyes. "They think they've cornered us. But they forgot one thing." Maya frowned. "What?" He picked up his phone and scrolled to a contact label to Jessica Lee. "We still have the truth, and the truth doesn't need a badge to fight back." The battle was far from over. In fact, it was about to get much uglier. The morning after Jordan Reynolds' suspension, the world outside their home felt colder, sharper, like the calm before a storm. Maya sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through news alerts on her phone. The articles covering the vandalism and threats had sparked outrage, but without official accountability, the fury was already beginning to fade. Public attention was fickle, and the system counted on that. Jordan, dressed in plain clothes instead of his uniform, paced the room like a caged animal. Suspension didn't mean defeat, it meant freedom. Freedom from departmental politics, freedom to act without restraint. But they needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof that the retaliation wasn't random, but orchestrated from within. "Carla's our best shot," Jordan muttered, phone in hand. "If she can pull the internal logs and surveillance timestamps, we can trace who ordered the shutdown of the body cams and who accessed our home address." Maya nodded, determination hardening her features. "And Jessica's already working on the next expose. This time we don't just tell our story, we expose the entire chain of corruption." An hour later, Jordan met Ruiz in a quiet corner of a coffee shop far from the precinct. She slid a flash drive across the table, eyes darting around nervously. "This is everything I could pull without raising red flags," Ruiz whispered. "Dispatch logs, body cam activation failures, access records. It all ties back to Parker's office. He was the one who authorized the community center shutdown and flagged your house as a potential hotspot for anti-police activity." Jordan's stomach twisted. Parker had gone beyond retaliation. He'd weaponized department resources to target them, painting them as threats to justify surveillance and harassment. "Thank you, Carla," Jordan murmured, gripping the flash drive. "This is what we needed." But Ruiz didn't look relieved. Her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. "There's something else. I overheard Parker on the phone last night. He's planning to push a narrative that you were mentally unstable after your suspension. If anything happens to you or Maya, they'll spin it as self-inflicted." Jordan's breath caught. "They're setting us up," Ruiz nodded grimly. "You need to move fast. Once Parker realizes this evidence is out, he'll escalate." That evening, Jordan and Maya sat side by side in the living room, reviewing the files on Jordan's laptop. Every detail confirmed what they already suspected. Morrison and Reed were foot soldiers, but Parker was the puppet master, pulling strings and covering tracks. "It's enough," Maya whispered, voice trembling with relief and anger. "This blows the whole thing wide open." Jordan didn't hesitate. He called Jessica Lee. "We've got what you need, full documentation, chain of command, timelines. Can you get it to air by tomorrow?" Jessica's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and energized. "Tomorrow, try tonight. The station's already holding a spot for an update. Get me the files now." Maya copied everything onto a separate flash drive while Jordan uploaded the documents to a secure cloud server. They weren't taking any chances. 2 hours later, the news broadcast hit the airwaves like a bombshell. Breaking, new evidence exposes police retaliation against whistleblower Captain Reynolds. The footage showed everything. The vandalism, the threats, the shutdown of the community center, and the falsified complaints filed against Jordan. The most damning piece was the dispatch log proving Parker had flagged the Reynolds home as a surveillance target, labeling them as potential agitators. The backlash was immediate. Social media exploded with outrage. Protesters flooded the streets outside the precinct, holding signs that read, "Accountability now," and "Stop the blue shield of silence." The mayor's office, unable to ignore the outcry, announced an independent investigation into the department. Internal Affairs, under public pressure, reopened Jordan's original complaint, not as an isolated incident, but as part of a systemic abuse of power. But Parker wasn't going down quietly. The next morning, Maya left for the community center, determined to reopen despite the shutdown order. Jordan stayed home reviewing files when a knock sounded at the door. Through the peephole he saw two uniformed officers, faces unfamiliar, posture rigid. "Open up, Reynolds," one called. "We've got a warrant." Jordan's blood ran cold. A warrant? For what? He cracked the door, phone in hand, already recording. "Show me the paperwork." The officer shoved a document through the gap. It was hastily written, citing suspicion of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. Jordan's heart pounded. This was Parker's final play. Discredit him, seize the evidence, and bury the truth. "I'm not resisting," Jordan said, stepping back with hands raised. "But you're being recorded, and this warrant, illegal as hell. You really want to tie yourselves to Parker's sinking ship?" The officers hesitated. One, younger and visibly nervous, glanced at his partner. "Sir, we're just following orders." "Orders that'll cost you your badge when this blows up," Jordan snapped. "Parker's exposed. His name's all over the news. You really think he'll protect you when IA comes knocking?" The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, the older one cursed under his breath, lowering his hand from his weapon. "Get out of here," Jordan growled, "before you dig yourselves in deeper." They backed off, retreating to the patrol car without another word. Jordan slammed the door and immediately called Ruiz. "They're getting desperate," he muttered. "We need IA to act now, before someone gets hurt." The breaking point came that night. Maya was locking up the community center when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Last chance. Drop it or lose everything." Her hands trembled, but her resolve didn't waver. She forwarded the message to Jessica and Jordan, then drove straight home, heart pounding the entire way. As she pulled into the driveway, headlights flashed behind her. A black SUV, windows tinted, idled at the curb. Maya froze. Then Jordan was there, yanking open the passenger door and pulling her inside. "Drive," he ordered, "now." "What's happening?" Maya gasped, tires screeching as she sped away from the house. Parker's cornered. "Ruiz just called. IA's raiding his office tomorrow morning. But he knows, and he's not going down without a fight." Maya's throat tightened. "Do they have enough to arrest him?" Jordan nodded grimly. "More than enough, but desperate men do desperate things." That night, they stayed in a hotel under an assumed name. Phones switched to burner numbers Jessica had provided. From the safety of the room, they watched the news as the story unfolded in real time. Lieutenant Greg Parker under investigation for orchestrating retaliation against whistleblower officer. The footage cut to the precinct, where officers from internal affairs swarmed Parker's office, carrying out boxes of files and hard drives. Parker himself was led out in handcuffs, face twisted in fury as cameras flashed. "This isn't over," Parker shouted, struggling against the officers. "You hear me, Reynolds? You think you've won. This isn't over." But it was. For him, at least. The following morning, Jordan's suspension was lifted. The complaint against him was officially dismissed, and Parker's entire network of corruption began unraveling. Morrison and Reed, once protected by Parker's shield, now faced their own investigations. At the community center, Maya stood in front of the reopened doors, watching children stream inside, laughter filling the air. The graffiti had been scrubbed, clean, the windows replaced, but the scars, the lessons remained. Jordan joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "We fought back," he murmured, "and we won." Maya leaned into him, eyes never leaving the bustling center. "We survived," she corrected, "but the fight's far from over, because for every Parker taken down, the system remained. And the Reynolds weren't done fighting, not until justice wasn't just a fleeting victory, but a lasting reality." The morning after Lieutenant Parker's arrest, the sun rose over Houston with an eerie calm. The storm had passed, but the damage it left behind was undeniable. Jordan Reynolds sat on the front steps of their home, sipping coffee from a chipped mug while scrolling through endless news updates on his phone. Lieutenant Greg Parker faces multiple charges, including abuse of power and conspiracy. Corrupt cops exposed how one family took on the system and won. Justice for Maya retaliation case sparks nationwide conversation about police accountability. The headlines were bold, triumphant even, but Jordan couldn't shake the lingering weight in his chest. Victory wasn't as sweet as he'd imagined. It tasted more like exhaustion. Inside, Maya was on the phone with Jessica Lee, the journalist who had been instrumental in exposing the corruption. "Yes," Maya said, voice firm, "we'll make a statement, but this isn't closure, it's just the beginning." She hung up and joined Jordan outside, sliding her hand into his. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. Jordan exhaled, slowly. "Relieved, angry, tired, take your pick." Maya squeezed his hand. "They arrested Parker. Morrison and Reed are facing termination. The city's launching a full review of misconduct cases. That's progress." "Yeah," Jordan muttered, "but it cost us everything: trust, peace of mind, our sense of safety." Maya didn't argue. How could she? Their home had been violated, their community center shuttered, their reputation dragged through the mud. The scars, emotional and literal, weren't going to fade overnight. Later that afternoon, Jordan met with Sergeant Carla Ruiz at the precinct. She looked equally worn down, dark circles under her eyes from long nights navigating the fallout. "Internal Affairs is cleaning house," Ruiz said, sliding a thick report across the desk. "Parker's not the only one. Several senior officers were complicit, turning a blind eye, covering up misconduct, falsifying reports. It's uglier than we thought." Jordan flipped through the pages, jaw tightening. Familiar names leapt off the paper, officers he'd worked alongside, trusted. It was a betrayal that cut deep. "They're offering you reinstatement," Ruiz continued, watching him carefully. "Full clearance, no black mark on your record." Jordan leaned back in the chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "And what? Go back to pretending the system isn't broken, that it only takes down its own when the media shines a light on it?" Ruiz didn't answer. She didn't need to. "I'm done," Jordan muttered, pushing the report away. "I'm not fighting this battle from the inside anymore." Back home, Maya was busy reopening the community center. Volunteers scrubbed graffiti off the walls, repainted the doors, and restocked shelves with school supplies and pantry items. The kids were slowly trickling back in, laughter returning to halls that had once echoed with fear, but the threats hadn't entirely stopped. Anonymous calls, nasty emails, social media trolls labeling them as anti-police agitators. Victory, it seemed, painted a target on their backs. Jessica Lee arrived mid-afternoon, camera crew in tow, ready to film the next chapter of the story. "How does it feel?" she asked Maya, microphone in hand. "To know that your fight sparked real change?" Maya smiled faintly, but there was no celebration in her eyes. "Change isn't real until it's permanent. One bad cop in handcuffs doesn't fix a system designed to protect people like him. We've exposed a crack, now we have to widen it." The independent review of the Houston Police Department uncovered over 50 cases of misconduct that had been quietly swept under the rug. Some officers resigned before they could be investigated. Others, like Morrison and Reed, faced formal charges. But for every officer held accountable, another stepped into their place, the cycle threatening to repeat itself. Reform came slowly, painfully. Implicit bias training, new oversight committees, civilian review boards. Band-aids on a wound too deep to heal without radical surgery. Jordan and Maya watched the changes from the sidelines, no longer trusting the system to fix itself without constant pressure. They became advocates, speaking at community meetings, lobbying for legislation, partnering with civil rights organizations to push for independent oversight of law enforcement. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya stood outside the community center, watching the kids pack up after the long day of tutoring and activities. Jordan joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "We made it," he murmured. "For now," Maya replied, leaning into him. "But the fight's not over." Jordan nodded. "It never is." As they turned to lock up, Maya's phone buzzed with a new email. Subject line, "Thank you for fighting." It was from the mother of a teenager who had been unfairly targeted by police months earlier. The boy had avoided charges, thanks to the increased scrutiny on law enforcement after the Reynolds case. "Sometimes," Jordan said, reading over her shoulder, "winning isn't about feeling victorious. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to fight the same battle. Maya smiled faintly, slipping her phone into her pocket. Then let's make sure we keep winning. Together, they walked into the night, not as victims, not just as survivors, but as warriors, ready for whatever fight came next. The calm that followed Parker's arrest felt fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. The headlines had cooled, the protests had dwindled, and the city had settled into an uneasy peace. But for Jordan and Maya Reynolds, peace was an illusion. They knew better than to believe the system would simply fold without a fight. Jordan had officially resigned from the force, trading his badge for advocacy work alongside Maya. Together, they spoke at community meetings, partnered with civil rights organizations, and pushed for systemic reform. The victory felt real, but their guard never dropped. They'd fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to think the danger was truly behind them. And then the betrayal came, from the last place they expected. It started with a knock at the door one crisp morning. Jordan opened it to find Sergeant Carla, Ruiz standing there, her face tight with worry. "Jordan," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. "We need to talk. Inside." Maya appeared behind Jordan, eyes narrowing. "What's wrong?" Ruiz stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind her. "You've got a leak," she said, voice low. "Someone from your inner circle is feeding information to the department's old guard, the ones who still think you're the enemy." Jordan stiffened. "That's impossible. The only people we trust now are the ones who stood by us." Ruiz handed him a folder, printouts of emails, text exchanges, and internal memos. Jordan flipped through them, his stomach sinking with each page. The messages detailed their meetings with activists, strategies for pressuring the city council, and even personal schedules. Maya's voice trembled with disbelief. Who could have? Ruiz cut her off with a single name. Marcus. Jordan froze. Marcus Hale, his closest colleague during his time on the force, the man who had stood beside him during roll calls, shared meals at the precinct, and sworn loyalty when the department turned its back. Marcus had been at their house for barbecues, celebrated victories with them, mourned losses with them. No, Jordan muttered, shaking his head. Marcus wouldn't do this. Ruiz's expression was grim. I didn't want to believe it either, but the messages came from his department login. He's been feeding information to the remnants of Parker's circle, the ones still pulling strings behind the scenes. Maya's face hardened. After everything, after seeing what they did to us. Jordan's hands clenched into fists. Where is he now? Still on duty, Ruiz said quietly. But I don't think he's working alone. There's chatter about another move against you. Something big. That evening, Jordan confronted Marcus at a small diner on the east side of town, away from prying eyes. Maya stayed home, watching the door like a hawk, phone in hand, ready to call Ruiz if things went sideways. Marcus was already there, sipping coffee like it was just another day. When he saw Jordan, his face flickered with something. Guilt? Fear? Defiance? It was hard to tell. "Jordan," Marcus greeted, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." Jordan slid into the booth opposite him, expression unreadable. "Cut the crap, Marcus, I know." The smile vanished. Marcus set the coffee down carefully. "Know what exactly?" "That you've been feeding intel to the same people who tried to destroy my family." Jordan growled. "The same people who threatened my wife, trashed our home, and nearly got us killed." Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it," Jordan snapped. "Because from where I'm sitting, you sold us out." Marcus leaned in, voice low and urgent. "They cornered me, Jordan. After Parker went down, the higher-ups didn't just fold, they doubled down. I had two choices. Play along or lose everything. My job, my pension, my family's security." Jordan's eyes burned with betrayal. "So you threw us under the bus after everything we fought for." "I didn't give them everything," Marcus muttered defensively. "Just enough to keep them off my back. I never told them about the flash drive, about Ruiz helping you. I kept the real ammunition out of their hands." "Don't act like a hero," Jordan snapped. "You put us at risk. You gave them the fuel they needed to keep the harassment going." Marcus flinched but didn't deny it. Silence stretched between them, heavy with broken trust. Finally, Marcus sighed. I screwed up, I know that, but it's not too late to fix it. Jordan leaned back, arms crossed. How? There's one more name you haven't uncovered, Marcus admitted. Someone higher up, Assistant Chief Rowland. He was Parker's silent backer, the one keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. He's the reason Morrison and Reed still have supporters in the department. You take him down, and the whole house of cards collapses. Jordan's breath caught. Rowland, a man who'd smiled in his face during promotions, shaken his hand at department events, and quietly pulled strings to protect the status quo. You expect me to trust you after everything? Jordan asked, coldly. Marcus met his gaze, eyes pleading. No, but you don't have to trust me. Just use what I'm giving you, take it to Ruiz, to the mayor's office, to the press, whatever it takes. Jordan studied him for a long moment, then stood. If you're lying, Marcus, I'm not, Marcus interrupted, voice weary. I'm done choosing the wrong side. Back home, Maya listened in silence as Jordan relayed the conversation. When he finished, she sat quietly for a moment before speaking. Do you believe him? She asked. Jordan hesitated. I believe he's desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. Maya nodded slowly. Then we move carefully, no more trust, just facts and exposure. Together they compiled everything. Marcus's intel, Ruiz's logs, and the remaining evidence from Parker's investigation. By midnight, Jessica Lee had a new folder of documents in her inbox, along with one chilling note from Meyer. If something happens to us, don't let this die. The next morning, Internal Affairs raided Rowland's office. The evidence was damning: emails coordinating harassment efforts, falsified reports, and even an off-the-books surveillance directive targeting Jordan and Maya's community center. Rowland was escorted out of the precinct in handcuffs, his face twisted in shock and fury. The media swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. But Jordan and Maya didn't celebrate. They watched quietly from their living room, phones buzzing with texts from allies and supporters. Marcus called once, but Jordan let it go, to voicemail. Trust once broken wasn't easily repaired. Maya leaned her head on Jordan's shoulder, exhaustion etched into her features. Do you think it's really over this time? Jordan wrapped an arm around her, eyes fixed on the television, screen where Rowland was being loaded into the back of a patrol car. No, he said quietly. But it's one less threat in a system full of them. They sat together as night fell, knowing peace was temporary, but resolve was permanent. They had survived betrayal, fought back against corruption, and reclaimed their lives, but the fight for justice was never truly over, and they were ready for whatever came next. The fallout from Assistant Chief Rowland's arrest was swift and unforgiving. Within hours of his mugshot flashing across every local news station, the mayor's office announced a full-scale investigation into the Houston Police Department's internal affairs. The so-called Reynolds case had officially transcended a single family's fight for justice, exposing a rot that stretched into the highest ranks of law enforcement. Jordan and Meyer watched the press conference from their living room, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. The victory was undeniable, but the weight of what it had cost them, peace, trust, safety, hung heavy in the air. They're calling it a win for accountability, Maya murmured, setting down her coffee. But why doesn't it feel like one? Jordan rubbed his hands together, gaze fixed on the television. Because accountability isn't justice, it's damage control. They'll cut out the infected parts, but the system survives. Maya nodded slowly. So what now? Do we keep fighting? Or do we step back, let someone else carry the torch? Jordan didn't answer immediately. He reached for his phone, scrolling through dozens of unread messages. Some were from colleagues offering quiet support, others from strangers sharing stories of their own encounters with abuse of power. One message stood out, from a young woman named Layla in Austin. Your story gave me the courage to speak out against the officer who harassed my brother. Thank you for showing us it's possible to fight back. Jordan exhaled, shoulders slumping. We don't step back, he said finally. We find a way to make this fight sustainable, not just for us, but for everyone. The days that followed were a blur of interviews, meetings, and strategy sessions. The community center became more than just a safe space for kids. It transformed into a hub for activism and legal support. Volunteers organized Know Your Rights workshops, while lawyers offered pro bono consultations for families facing unjust treatment by law enforcement. Maya threw herself into the work, her exhaustion fueled by righteous anger and determination. She coordinated with local organizations, ensuring that the momentum they built didn't fizzle out once the headlines shifted. But even as progress was made, the scars of their ordeal lingered. One afternoon, while sorting through donations at the center, Maya received a call from Jessica Lee. "Got a minute?" Jessica asked, her tone cautious. "Always," Maya replied, wiping her hands on her jeans. "There's talk that some of Roland's allies are regrouping," Jessica warned, not in any official capacity but quietly. "Whispers about cleaning house, getting rid of anyone seen as disloyal to the department." Maya's stomach dropped. "Meaning us, meaning anyone who stood with you," Jessica clarified. "Ruiz, the activists, even some city officials who backed the investigation. The system's wounded, but it's not dead, and wounded animals lash out." Maya clenched her jaw. "We can't let them regroup. We need to stay ahead of this." Jessica sighed. "I figured you'd say that. I'm already working on a follow-up piece, exposing the retaliation before it gains traction." "Good," Maya said firmly. "We fight in the light, no shadows." Meanwhile, Jordan had been working behind the scenes, leveraging connections from his time on the force. With Ruiz's help, he partnered with a coalition of former officers, those who had left the department disillusioned but still committed to justice. Together, they launched the Reynolds Justice Initiative, an independent watchdog group focused on monitoring police conduct, advocating for legislative reform, and supporting victims of systemic abuse. The initiative gained traction quickly, attracting attention from national organizations and civil rights leaders. Donations poured in, enough to hire a small team and establish a permanent office adjacent to the community center. But with visibility came new risks. Late one night, after another long meeting, Jordan and Maya returned home to find a single envelope taped to their front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold, blocky letters. "You think you've won? Watch your back." Maya stared at the note, pulse racing. "They're still watching us." Jordan crumpled the paper, fury flashing in his eyes. "Let them watch. We're not hiding." The next day, they installed additional security cameras, reinforced the center's locks, and circulated the threat to the media. Jessica's follow-up article didn't just mention the note, it framed it as proof that the fight for justice was far from over. The Reynolds family stood against corruption and won, but victory doesn't mean safety, not when the system protects itself at all costs. The question now is, will the city stand with them or let history repeat itself? Weeks turned into months. Roland was convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, abuse of power, and falsification of records. Morrison and Reed lost their badges, along with several others implicated during the investigation. The department implemented mandatory bias training and strengthened civilian oversight, though Jordan and Maya remained skeptical of reforms driven by scandal rather than sincerity. The threats, while less frequent, never fully stopped. But neither did the work. One evening, as they locked up the community center after a town hall meeting, Maya paused at the doorway, watching the last of the volunteers head home under the glow of streetlights. "Do you think we made a difference?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with exhaustion and hope. Jordan wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We made it harder for them to pretend nothing's wrong. That's a start." Maya nodded, leaning into him. "And if they come for us again?" Jordan's smile was grim but determined. "Then we fight, together always." They stood there for a moment longer, silhouetted against the light of the community center, the very place where the battle had begun. The scars they carried were deep, but so was their resolve, because justice, they'd learned, wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and they were far from finished. The story of Jordan and Maya Reynolds is more than a tale of personal resilience. It's a stark reminder of the deep-rooted flaws within systems designed to protect, yet often weaponized against those who dare to challenge them. Their journey exposed a harsh reality. Corruption doesn't crumble under a single blow. It fights back, reshapes itself, and finds new ways to survive. Through every threat, betrayal, and act of intimidation, one truth remained clear. Silence is complicity. Maya and Jordan didn't win because they had power. They won because they refused to be silenced. They exposed injustice not just to protect themselves, but to ensure others wouldn't face the same nightmare. Their victory wasn't in dismantling the entire system overnight, but in lighting a fire that forced accountability, sparked reform, and empowered countless others to stand up. But the cost was high. Peace of mind was sacrificed. Trust was broken. Friendships were lost. It's easy to call them heroes, but the reality is far messier. They weren't fearless, they were terrified. But courage, after all, isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. And that's the real lesson here. Change doesn't come from comfort, it comes from sacrifice, persistence, and an unyielding belief that justice is worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds seem. So now, the question turns to you. What would you have done in Jordan and Maya's place? Would you have stood your ground knowing the system would retaliate? Or would the fear of losing everything have forced you into silence? Comment number 1. If you believe the Reynolds were right to fight back despite the danger. Like and subscribe if you believe holding those in power accountable is the only path to true justice. And share this story if you believe more people need to see what standing up for what's right really costs and why it's worth it. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice isn't given, it's demanded. Stay safe, stay aware, and keep fighting for what's right. See you in the next story.